Part 1. The morning sun rose over New Haven Colony like any other day. Helen Grant stood on her porch drinking coffee and watching the forest come alive with sound. Birds sang in the tall trees. Children laughed as they walked to school. Farmers drove their trucks toward the fields, ready for another day of work. Helen smiled. 7 years ago, this place had been nothing but empty forest. Now it was home to 12,000 people. They had built houses, schools, shops, and farms. They had made a life here on this quiet moon, far from the noise and conflict of the busy galaxy. She finished her coffee and walked to the operations center. It was a small building in the middle of town, where they monitored the sensors and handled communications. Kyle Murphy was already at his station, staring at a screen with a confused look on his face. "Morning, Kyle," Helen said. "Everything okay?" Kyle pointed at his screen. "I'm not sure. Look at this." Helen leaned over his shoulder. The long-range sensors showed 17 ships at the edge of their star system. Big ships. Military ships. Her stomach tightened. "When did they arrive?" she asked. "About 20 minutes ago. They just dropped out of hyperspace and stopped. They haven't moved since." Helen studied the sensor data. The ships were Cauldron design. She recognized the patterns from the military database. The Cauldron were an insect-like species that controlled a large empire. They were known for being aggressive, always looking to expand their territory. "Why would they come here?" Kyle asked. "We're nobody. We don't have anything valuable. We're not even near any trade routes." Helen didn't have an answer. She pulled up the communication system. "Send a message to the Galactic Council. Tell them we have unidentified Cauldron military vessels in our system. Then activate the emergency alert." Kyle's fingers moved quickly across his controls. Within seconds, sirens began wailing across New Haven. The sound made Helen's heart race. They had drills for emergencies, but this was real. This was actually happening. People stopped what they were doing. Parents grabbed their children. Teachers led students toward the underground shelters. Everyone had practiced this. Everyone knew what to do. But knowing what to do and actually doing it while feeling terrified were two different things. Lisa Hayes rushed into the operations center. She was their communications officer, a young woman who had come to New Haven to escape the crowded cities of Earth. "Helen, what's going on?" Lisa asked. "Cauldron ships. 17 of them. Get the emergency beacon ready." Lisa's face went pale. The emergency beacon was connected directly to human military channels. It was only used when something terrible was happening. Helen watched her screens as the Cauldron ships began moving. They were coming toward the moon. Coming toward New Haven. She opened a communication channel broadcasting on all frequencies. "Attention Cauldron vessels. This is Helen Grant, administrator of New Haven Colony. We are a peaceful civilian settlement. We have no military forces. We have no weapons. Please identify yourself and state your intentions." She waited. 10 seconds, 20, 30, no response. The ships kept coming. They moved into orbit around the moon, spreading out in a pattern Helen recognized from military tactics. It was an attack formation. "Kyle, are the shelters full?" she asked. "Almost. Another 5 minutes." Helen looked at the screens again. The Cauldron ships were charging their weapons. She could see the energy signatures building on the sensors. "We don't have 5 minutes," she whispered. Then louder, "Lisa, activate the emergency beacon now." Lisa's hand shook as she opened the secure channel. She pressed the activation button and spoke into the microphone. "This is New Haven Colony on Virtus 4. We are under attack by Cauldron forces, civilian population, requesting immediate assistance." The message would broadcast continuously, sending their location and situation to any human military ship within range. But the nearest military base was 6 jumps away. Help, if it came, would take hours. The first weapons blast hit the landing pad. The explosion was so bright it hurt to look at. 3 cargo ships vaporized instantly, turned into expanding clouds of metal vapor and fire. The shockwave rattled the windows of the operations center. "Get down," Kyle shouted. They dove under their desks as the bombardment began in earnest. Blast after blast rained down from orbit. The power station exploded, plunging half the colony into darkness. The medical center, a beautiful building where doctors had saved so many lives, simply ceased to exist. A shopping district where families had bought food just hours ago became a crater. Helen crawled to her desk and grabbed the beacon transmitter. She held it close, watching its light blink steadily. The message was still broadcasting. "Still calling for help? Why?" Lisa sobbed. "Why are they doing this?" "We didn't do anything to them. Helen had no answer. The bombardment continued. Each explosion shook the ground. Dust fell from the ceiling. The lights flickered and died, leaving only the glow of the emergency displays. For 6 hours, the Cauldron ships fired on New Haven. They targeted every major building, every structure that made the colony work. The school where children learned mathematics and history, the farms where crops grew in careful rows, the homes where families had felt safe. When the bombardment finally stopped, Helen carefully looked out the window. The colony was destroyed. Fires burned everywhere. Buildings that had taken years to build were now just rubble. The beautiful forest nearby was torn and blackened. The sky was dark with smoke. Then new sensors alarms beeped. Kyle checked his screen, his face grim. Ground troops. They're landing. Through the broken windows, they could see Cauldron drop ships descending through the smoke. Large insect-like creatures in armor marched out, their weapons ready. They moved through the ruins, searching for survivors. "We need to get to the deep shelter," Helen said. "Grab everything we can carry." They gathered their equipment and ran through the destroyed streets. Bodies lay in the rubble. People they had known. People they had worked with. Friends. Helen forced herself not to look, not to think about it. She had to survive. They all had to survive. They reached the deep shelter and pounded on the door. It opened, and hands pulled them inside. 87 people were crammed into a space meant for 50. They were all that remained of 12,000. Above them, they could hear the Cauldron soldiers. Heavy footsteps, clicking sounds in their alien language, weapons fire as they destroyed anything still standing. Helen sat against the wall holding the beacon transmitter. Its light still blinked, still called for help. She looked at the faces around her, children with wide, terrified eyes, parents trying to comfort them while fighting their own fear, old and young, scared and hurt but alive. "Someone will come," she whispered. "Someone has to come." The beacon kept blinking in the darkness, sending its desperate message out into the vast emptiness of space, hoping someone would hear and care enough to help. Part 2 Admiral Jack Morrison was reviewing routine patrol reports when his command console lit up with a priority alert. Every officer on the bridge of the carrier vessel Liberty stopped what they were doing. Priority alerts were rare. They meant something serious was happening. "Play it," Morrison ordered. A woman's voice filled the bridge, shaky but clear. "This is New Haven Colony on Virtus 4. We are under attack by Cauldron forces. Civilian population. Requesting immediate assistance," the message repeated. Behind the words, they could hear explosions, screaming, the sound of weapons destroying everything. Morrison felt his jaw tighten. He had been in the military for 30 years. He had seen combat. But hearing civilians under attack was different. It made something cold and angry settle in his chest. "How old is this message?" he asked. Chris Palmer, his tactical officer, checked his console. 7 hours, sir. It's been broadcasting continuously since then. 7 hours. Morrison closed his eyes for a moment. 7 hours of bombardment. 7 hours of terror. 7 hours while the colony waited for help that hadn't come. "Get me current images of that system," he said. "And someone contact the Cauldron Embassy. I want to know what they have to say about this." The main view screen changed to show satellite data from the Virtus 4 system. What Morrison saw made his hands curl into fists. New Haven Colony was burning. Thermal scans showed massive fires across the entire settlement. The orbital scans detected very few life signs compared to the colony's registered population. "How many people live there?" Morrison asked quietly. 12,000, sir," Chris answered. "Mostly families." It was a farming colony. 12,000 civilians. Farmers, teachers, children, people who had gone to that distant moon to live peaceful lives, far from any conflict. Beth Warner, the communications officer, turned to face Morrison. "Sir, the Cauldron Embassy says they have no knowledge of any military operations in that sector. They claim this must be a mistake or false information." "That's a lie," Morrison said, his voice flat and cold. "Those are Cauldron warships, Cauldron weapon signatures, Cauldron soldiers on the ground. They know exactly what happened." He stood up, his decision already made. "How fast can we get a response fleet to Virtus 4? Chris worked his console quickly. 16 hours if we pull ships from 3 different battle groups. We could do 12 hours if we push the engines hard. Do it. Pull every ship we can spare from the 5th and 7th fleets. I want them ready to jump in 12 hours. Morrison looked around the bridge at his crew. They were all watching him, waiting. Send a flash message to Earth. Tell them we have a code red situation. Unprovoked attack on a civilian colony. And tell them I'm taking the fleet to respond. The bridge erupted into activity. Messages flew to ships across human space. Captains were woken from sleep. Crews ran to their stations. Supply officers began loading ammunition and fuel at record speed. Within an hour, 73 human warships were preparing to jump to the Virtus 4 system. Morrison sat in his command chair, watching the preparations. He knew what this meant. The Cauldron had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. For over a century, humans had been peaceful members of the galactic community. They traded fairly. They followed the laws. They resolved disputes through diplomacy, but there were some things humans wouldn't tolerate. Attacks on civilians was at the top of that list. On Virtus 4, Helen and the other survivors huddled in the deep shelter. They had been there for 9 hours now. The air was getting stale. The children were hungry and scared. Everyone was exhausted, but no one could sleep. They could still hear the Cauldron soldiers above them, searching through the ruins. Kyle sat near the door with a metal pipe in his hands. It was the only weapon they had. Several other men had found similar tools. They all knew how useless these would be against military weapons, but holding something made them feel slightly less helpless. "They're going to find us eventually," whispered a man named Peter. He was a farmer, a big strong man who now looked small and frightened. "These doors won't hold forever." "Then we make them regret it," Kyle said quietly. "We make them work for every inch." Helen checked the beacon transmitter again. Still blinking. Still broadcasting. She didn't know if anyone had received their message. She didn't know if anyone was coming. But she had to believe. Because if no one came, if no one cared that 12,000 humans had been attacked, then what was the point of anything? Lisa sat with the children, telling them stories to keep them calm. Her voice was soft and gentle, even though Helen could see the fear in her eyes. The children listened, grateful for any distraction from the nightmare they were living. An explosion shook the shelter. Dust fell from the ceiling. The Cauldron had found one of the other shelter entrances and were trying to break through. "Everybody get back from the door," Kyle ordered. The men with pipes and tools moved forward, forming a line. If the Cauldron broke through, they would fight. They would lose, but they would fight. The explosion came again. And again. The Cauldron were persistent. The heavy door groaned under the assault. Lights flickered. Helen held the beacon close and prayed to anyone who might be listening. "Please let someone have heard us. Please let help be coming." In space, far above the moon, Cauldron Commander Thraxil stood on his ship's bridge. He was pleased with how the operation had gone. The human colony had been weak and unprepared. His forces had destroyed it easily. This world now belonged to the Cauldron Empire. Status on ground operations? He asked his second-in-command, Veltar. "We have secured most of the colony, Commander. There appear to be survivors hiding in underground shelters. We are working to extract them." "Good. Process them for labor camps. This world will need workers to rebuild according to Cauldron needs." Velthar hesitated. "Commander, I must advise caution. The humans filed proper territorial claims for this world. The Galactic Council will question our actions." Thraxil's mandibles clicked in annoyance. "The Council is weak. They speak much but do little. And the humans are weak as well. Look how easily they fell. One small fleet in this colony is ours. The human military is too spread out, too concerned with maintaining peace to respond with force. But if they do respond, then we will crush them as we crushed this colony. The Cauldron Empire grows stronger every year. The humans grow softer. They have forgotten how to fight. This is our time to expand." What Thraxil didn't know, what his intelligence reports had failed to understand, was that humans hadn't forgotten how to fight. They had chosen not to. There was a difference, and it was a crucial one. The Cauldron knew humans as peaceful traders and careful diplomats. They knew humans avoided conflict when possible. What they didn't know was why humans avoided conflict. They didn't know the human history, didn't know the wars that had nearly destroyed their species, didn't know that human peace wasn't weakness but careful, deliberate control, and they definitely didn't know what happened when that control was broken. In 12 hours, they would find out. Admiral Morrison stood on the Liberty's bridge as the countdown reached 0. Around him, 73 ships of the human fleet prepared to jump. This was the largest military mobilization humanity had made in over 100 years. "All ships report ready, sir," Chris said. Morrison took a deep breath. Once they engaged the Cauldron fleet, there would be no going back. This would be an act of war. But the Cauldron had already made it war when they attacked New Haven. "Execute jump," Morrison ordered. "All ships, weapons hot. Execute assault pattern Delta on arrival." The fleet disappeared from normal space in a flash of light. For a few seconds they traveled through the strange realm of hyperspace. Then they emerged at the edge of the Virtus 4 system. 73 human warships materialized in perfect formation. Carriers, battleships, destroyers, and frigates. The pride and power of humanity's defensive fleet. On his sensors, Morrison could see the Cauldron fleet still in orbit over the moon, apparently relaxed and unconcerned. Part 3 Admiral Morrison stared at the tactical display showing the Cauldron fleet orbiting Virtus 4. The alien ships were positioned casually, like they owned the system. Like they hadn't just committed mass murder. His jaw tightened. "Open a channel to the Cauldron fleet," he ordered. "All frequencies, including their military bands. I want everyone to hear this." Beth worked her console. "Channel open, sir." Morrison spoke slowly and clearly, making sure every word would be understood. "Cauldron vessels. This is Admiral Jack Morrison of the Human Defense Fleet. You have attacked a civilian colony in violation of interstellar law. You have murdered unarmed humans. You have one chance to surrender. You have 10 minutes to respond." On the bridge of the Cauldron flagship, Commander Thraxel heard the message and clicked his mandibles in what passed for laughter among his species. He looked at Velthar. "The humans send one fleet to threaten us? How amusing." "Commander, that is not one fleet. My sensors show 73 warships. This is a significant force." Thraxel studied his own displays. The human fleet was impressive in number, he had to admit. But numbers weren't everything. The Cauldron had 17 heavy warships, each one a match for 3 or 4 human vessels. At least that's what the intelligence reports claimed. "Send them our response," Thraxel ordered. "Tell them this world is now Cauldron territory. Tell them to leave or be destroyed." The message was sent. On the Liberty, Morrison listened to the Cauldron response. He had expected it, but hearing it still made his blood run cold. They weren't sorry. They weren't going to surrender. They actually believed they could win. "All ships," Morrison said quietly. "Weapons free. Execute assault pattern Delta. I want that fleet eliminated. Leave nothing intact." The human fleet accelerated toward the planet. They moved in 3 separate wings, each one targeting specific Cauldron vessels. This wasn't a charge. It was a precisely calculated attack, every ship with an assigned role and target. The Cauldron fleet scrambled to respond. They had been caught off guard, relaxed after their easy victory over the colony. Now they rushed to battle stations trying to form a defensive line. But they were too slow. The first human destroyers launched missiles while still at extreme range. Hundreds of missiles streaked through space, their engines burning bright. The Cauldron activated their point defense systems, shooting down as many missiles as they could. But there were too many. Far too many. A Cauldron heavy cruiser managed to destroy most of the missiles targeting it. Most, but not all. 6 missiles got through and slammed into its hull. The cruiser's shields flashed and failed. Secondary explosions rippled through its structure. In 16 seconds, the mighty warship broke apart, debris spreading in all directions. "First kill confirmed," Chris reported. "Target designated Kilo 1 is destroyed." Morrison nodded. "Continue firing. All ships maintain formation and advance." The battle spread across orbital space. The Cauldron fought back hard, their weapons powerful and deadly. One human frigate took a direct hit and limped away, its hull breached. But for every human ship damaged, 2 Cauldron ships died. The humans fought with a precision the Cauldron had never seen before. Each ship knew exactly where to be, exactly when to fire. They used overlapping fields of fire, catching Cauldron vessels in crossfires. They targeted weak points in the alien armor with ruthless efficiency. Commander Thraxel watched in growing horror as his fleet died around him. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The humans were supposed to be weak, peaceful, easy to intimidate. Instead, they fought like machines, cold and efficient and unstoppable. "We need to retreat," Velthar said urgently. "We've lost 9 ships. We cannot win this battle." "No," Thraxel said. "The Empire does not retreat. Order all ships to concentrate fire on their flagship. If we kill their admiral, perhaps they will break." It was a mistake. The human fleet had anticipated that exact tactic. As the remaining Cauldron ships turned to target the Liberty, they exposed their flanks to the other human vessels. Human railguns fired, sending solid metal projectiles at incredible speeds. The rounds punched through Cauldron armor like paper. 3 more Cauldron ships died in the next minute. "Commander, we must go now," Belthar insisted. "If we stay, we all die." Thraxel finally accepted the truth. He had lost. "Engine room, prepare for emergency jump. All ships retreat from the system." His flagship began to turn, building power for a hyperspace jump. But the humans had predicted this too. 2 fast human frigates broke formation and accelerated to intercept. Their railguns fired with perfect accuracy, not to destroy but to disable. The shots hit the Cauldron flagship's engines, crippling them without destroying the ship. The flagship tumbled in space, helpless. Around it, the rest of the Cauldron fleet tried to escape. A few made it to hyperspace. Most didn't. The human fleet chased them down one by one like wolves hunting prey. In 20 minutes, it was over. 14 Cauldron warships were destroyed. The flagship was captured. Only 3 Cauldron vessels escaped, running for their lives back to their empire. Morrison surveyed the battlefield. His fleet had taken damage, but nothing critical. No human ships destroyed. Against a supposedly equal opponent, it had been a massacre. "Secure the Cauldron flagship," he ordered. "I want their commander alive. And send word to the ground forces. They can begin landing operations." On Virtus 4, the Cauldron ground troops had heard the space battle through their communications. They knew their fleet was gone. They knew they were trapped on this moon with no way to escape and no orbital support. Lieutenant Kevin Pierce led the first wave of human Marines to the surface. His dropship settled in the ruins of New Haven and he stepped out into devastation. Buildings were destroyed. Bodies lay in the streets. Everything was burned or broken or both. "Spread out," Pierce ordered his platoon. "Rules of engagement. Any Cauldron soldier who surrenders will be taken prisoner. Any who resist will be eliminated. Move out." The Marines advanced through the ruins in tactical formation. They found Cauldron soldiers quickly. Some tried to fight. Those fights lasted seconds before the Cauldron were cut down by superior weapons and training. Some tried to surrender immediately, dropping their weapons and raising their limbs in submission. Pierce's squad found a group of Cauldron looting what looked like someone's home. They were pulling through the remains, taking anything valuable. The sight made Pierce's blood boil, but he kept his voice professional. "Drop your weapons," he ordered. "Get on the ground, now." The Cauldron turned, raising their weapons. They made the last mistake of their lives. Pierce's squad fired as one. The Cauldron dropped, dead before they hit the ground. They pushed deeper into the colony, following signals from the emergency beacon. Helen's beacon was still transmitting from somewhere underground. Pierce's scanner led him to a heavy reinforced door, scarred from repeated explosions. "This is it," Pierce said. He keyed his radio. "Survivors, this is Lieutenant Kevin Pierce, Human Marine Corps. We've secured the area. You're safe. We're going to open the door now." Inside the shelter, Helen heard the words and burst into tears. They were English words. Human words. Real help had actually come. Kyle rushed to the door controls. "Stand back, everyone." "They're opening the door." The heavy door slid open. Bright light flooded in, making everyone squint. Dark shapes appeared in the doorway. Marines in combat armor, weapons ready, scanning for threats. Pierce stepped inside and saw the survivors. 87 people packed into a small space. Children, elderly, wounded. All of them exhausted and terrified and filthy. All of them alive. "Medics," Pierce called. "We need medics down here now." He looked at Helen, who was holding the beacon transmitter like a lifeline. "Ma'am, are you the administrator?" Helen nodded, unable to speak. "You did good," Pierce said gently. "You kept them alive. Help is here now. We've got medical ships in orbit, supplies coming down, and enough Marines to make sure you're safe. We're taking you home." Helen finally let go of the beacon. Its light still blinked, but it wasn't needed anymore. Help had come. They were saved. All around New Haven, Marines found other survivors, not many. Out of 12,000 people, only 243 had survived the attack. The rest were gone, killed by orbital bombardment or Cauldron ground forces. In orbit, Admiral Morrison boarded the captured Cauldron flagship. His Marines had secured the ship and were holding the crew in the cargo bay. He found Commander Thraxil in the command center, restrained and surrounded by armed guards. Morrison studied the alien commander for a long moment before speaking. Part 4. Morrison stood before Commander Thraxil on the captured Caldron flagship. The alien looked smaller now, restrained and defeated. His mandibles clicked nervously, a sign of stress among his species. "You are making a mistake, human," Thraxil said. "I am a commander of the Caldron Empire. I have rights under galactic law. Prisoners of war must be treated with respect." Morrison leaned close, his voice quiet but filled with cold fury. "You're right that prisoners of war have rights. But you didn't attack soldiers. You didn't attack a military base. You attacked civilians. You murdered children. You destroyed homes. In human law, that isn't war. That's called mass murder. The Caldron Empire will not accept this. They will send more fleets. They will retaliate." Morrison straightened. "Let them try. Your empire just made the worst mistake any species can make. You attacked human civilians. When word spreads through the galaxy, when everyone sees what happens to those who harm our people, your empire is going to learn a very expensive lesson." He turned to the guards. "Take him to a detention cell. He's going to Earth to stand trial for war crimes." As the guards led Thraxil away, Morrison returned to the Liberty. He had reports to write, families to notify, and a lot of explaining to do. But first he needed to check on the survivors. He took a shuttle down to New Haven's surface. What he saw made him understand why his Marines had looked so grim when they returned to their ships. The colony was completely destroyed. Not damaged. Not partially ruined. Completely, systematically destroyed. This hadn't been a military strike. This had been deliberate genocide. Morrison found Lieutenant Pierce at the temporary medical station that had been set up near the landing pad. "How many?" Morrison asked quietly. 243 survivors out of 12,000, sir. The rest..." Pierce trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Morrison closed his eyes. 12,000 people. Families who had just wanted to farm in peace. Children who would never grow up. Lives ended for no reason except cruelty and greed. "Get them off this moon as fast as you can," Morrison said. "I want every survivor on medical ships within 6 hours. And I want a full documentation team down here. Photos, videos, testimony, everything. The galaxy needs to see what happened here." Over the next few days, the survivors were evacuated to human medical facilities. Helen and the others were treated for injuries, given clean clothes, fed real food, and allowed to sleep in actual beds, but no amount of care could erase what they had experienced. Helen sat in her hospital room on a medical ship, staring out the window at the stars. A counselor had visited, offering support. A military officer had taken her statement about the attack. Everyone was very kind and very concerned, but none of it made her feel better. Kyle knocked on her door and entered. He looked better, physically at least. The cuts and bruises were healing, but his eyes held the same haunted look that Helen saw in her own mirror. "Have you seen the news?" Kyle asked. Helen shook her head. She hadn't wanted to look at anything, think about anything. The footage from New Haven is everywhere. Every human world, every space station, every ship. People are furious. There are protests outside Caldron embassies. The government is calling it an act of war. "Is that what it was?" Helen asked quietly. "Or was it just murder?" "I don't know. Maybe both." 3 days after the attack, the trial of Commander Thraxil began on Earth. It was broadcast across the entire galaxy, not just to human space, but to every species with communication technology. Billions of beings watched as human prosecutors presented their evidence. The video footage was damning. Orbital strikes targeting civilian structures. The medical center destroyed while doctors were treating patients. The school hit while children were inside. Bodies in the streets. Survivors huddling in shelters while Caldron troops hunted them. The prosecutor, a stern woman named Patricia Hill, stood before the Galactic Court. "Commander Thraxil claims this was a military operation. But let the evidence speak. Show me one military target that was hit. Show me one soldier who was killed. Show me any justification for 8,000 dead civilians." The Caldron defense lawyer argued that Thraxil was following orders, that he believed the colony was a military outpost, that it was a tragic mistake. But the evidence destroyed every argument. Communications showed Thraxil knew it was a civilian colony. He had ordered the systematic destruction anyway. Ambassador Richard Cole spoke before the Galactic Council, his voice heavy with barely controlled anger. "For a century, humanity has been peaceful. We have followed every law. We have resolved every dispute through diplomacy. We chose peace because we knew what war meant. We knew what we were capable of. We hoped the galaxy would respect that choice. He played the footage from New Haven one more time. Children running. Buildings exploding. People dying in the streets. This is what happens when our peace is mistaken for weakness. 8,000 civilians dead. Families destroyed. Lives ended for no reason except cruelty. And you ask us to accept this? To forgive? To move on? The council chamber was silent. Species from across the galaxy watched the footage with growing horror. The Cauldron Empire claims this was the action of one rogue commander. If that's true, let them prove it. Let them cooperate with our investigation. Let them pay restitution to the survivors. Let them guarantee this never happens again. Cole's voice hardened. Or let them face the consequences. The Cauldron delegation stood and walked out of the chamber. They returned to their empire and reported to their leaders. The Cauldron government, outraged at what they saw as human aggression, made their decision. They mobilized their fleets for war. The Cauldron Empire was vast. They controlled hundreds of star systems. Their military numbered in the millions. They had warships 3 times the size of human vessels. They had fought wars for centuries and won most of them. The Cauldron leadership believed the humans were bluffing. One colony destroyed didn't justify a full war. Humans were traitors and diplomats. They would negotiate. They would compromise. They would back down. The Cauldron were wrong about all of it. When news reached Earth that the Cauldron Empire had declared war, the human response was immediate and overwhelming. Fleet Command mobilized every available ship. Shipyards that had been running at low capacity suddenly operated 24 hours a day. Factories that made civilian goods retooled to produce weapons. Recruitment stations were overwhelmed with volunteers. Helen watched the news from her hospital room. She saw young men and women lining up to join the military. She saw families donating money to support the war effort. She saw the anger on every face, the determination in every voice. Is this what we are? She whispered to Kyle, who sat beside her. Is this what we become when someone hurts us? Maybe, Kyle said. Or maybe this is what we've always been and we just forgot. Admiral Morrison returned to the Liberty with new orders. The 5th and 7th fleets were being reinforced with ships from across human space. His task force was growing from 73 ships to over 300, and his orders were clear. Find Cauldron military targets and destroy them. No negotiations, no mercy. The Cauldron wanted war. Humanity would give them war. Morrison stood on his bridge looking at the star charts showing Cauldron territory. It was vast. The task ahead seemed impossible. But he thought about New Haven, about the children who died, about families destroyed, about a peaceful colony that had done nothing wrong. Plot a course for the Cauldron border systems, he ordered. All ships prepare for combat operations. We launch in 6 hours. The crew moved to follow his orders. Around Earth and across human space, hundreds of other ships were receiving similar orders. The human military was mobilizing for the first time in over a century. And when humanity mobilized for war, the galaxy was about to remember why so many species had learned to fear them. The Cauldron had wanted to expand their empire. They had chosen to attack a peaceful human colony to show their strength. They had killed thousands of civilians to prove their power. Now they were going to learn that attacking human civilians didn't bring diplomats to negotiate. It didn't bring traders to make deals. It brought the full weight of human military power, and that power was about to fall on them like a hammer. The war was beginning, and the Cauldron Empire had no idea what was coming. Part 5. The war began 3 weeks after the attack on New Haven. Admiral Morrison's fleet jumped into the Cauldron border system of Tarkus Prime, a major military staging area. The Cauldron had fortified it heavily, with orbital defense platforms, minefields, and a garrison fleet of 40 warships. Morrison studied the tactical display. Analysis, Chris. How long would a conventional assault take? Chris worked his console. 3 days minimum, sir. Heavy casualties expected. Those defense platforms are well positioned. Then we don't do a conventional assault, Morrison said. We do this the human way. He opened fleet communications. All ships execute Plan Gamma. Stealth Group, you're up first. 20 human ships broke away from the main fleet. They were smaller vessels designed for electronic warfare. They moved toward Tarkus Prime on silent running. Their engines barely lit. Their emissions dampened to almost nothing. The Cauldron sensors didn't detect them until they were already in position. The stealth ships activated their electronic warfare systems all at once. The Cauldron defense network went haywire. Sensors showed phantom ships everywhere. Communications channels filled with interference. Targeting systems locked onto empty space. The carefully coordinated defense became chaos. "Main fleet, advance now," Morrison ordered. "Hit them while they're blind." The human fleet accelerated into the system. The Cauldron tried to respond, but their systems were still struggling with the electronic attack. Defense platforms fired at ghost images. Ships collided with each other trying to form battle lines. It was a disaster. Human missiles poured into the confused Cauldron formation. Without proper coordination, the defense platforms fell one by one. The garrison fleet tried to rally, but human ships were already among them, firing at close range where the Cauldron's size advantage meant nothing. In 6 hours, Tarkus Prime fell. 40 Cauldron warships destroyed. All defense platforms eliminated. The shipyards captured. Human casualties were minimal. Across human space, similar attacks were happening. Human fleets struck at Cauldron supply lines, communication hubs, and military bases. They didn't fight the way the Cauldron expected. They used deception, electronic warfare, hit-and-run tactics. They studied Cauldron formations and found the weaknesses. They adapted to every defense the Cauldron tried. The Cauldron military command struggled to respond. Their traditional tactics didn't work against the humans. When they fortified systems heavily, humans bypassed them and struck somewhere else. When they spread their fleets thin to cover more territory, humans concentrated force and destroyed them piecemeal. When they tried to predict human movements, humans did the unexpected. In the Cauldron capital, the military council met in emergency session. General Krathtok, the Empire's supreme commander, reviewed the battle reports with growing concern. "How many systems have we lost?" he asked. 17 in the first month, an aide reported. "The humans are advancing on 3 different fronts. They're targeting our supply infrastructure. Food shipments aren't reaching garrison worlds. Ammunition factories are being destroyed. Communication relay stations are going offline. What about our counteroffensive? We sent 3 full battle fleets to strike at human colony worlds." The aide hesitated. "All 3 fleets were intercepted before reaching their targets. Human intelligence seems to know our movements before we make them. 2 fleets were destroyed. 1 retreated with heavy losses." Krathtok slammed his claw on the table. "How is this possible? We outnumber them 3-1. Our ships are larger, more powerful. We have been fighting wars for centuries. How are we losing to these humans?" No one had a good answer. The truth was becoming clear, though none of them wanted to say it. The humans didn't fight like other species. They didn't play by the expected rules. They used tactics that were confusing, unpredictable, and brutally effective. What the Cauldron didn't understand was human military history. Humans had spent 10,000 years fighting each other. They had developed warfare into a science, refined it into an art, and studied it with terrible dedication. Every human military officer learned about battles from Earth's past. They studied victories and defeats, analyzed what worked and what didn't, and applied those lessons to space warfare. The Cauldron were learning what other species had learned before them. Humans were scary when they decided to fight. Not because they were the strongest or the fastest or the most numerous, but because they were creative, adaptable, and absolutely ruthless when protecting their own. As the war continued into its 6th month, the effects on the Cauldron Empire became severe. Trade routes were cut. Colony worlds ran short of supplies. The military struggled to maintain operations as logistics broke down. And more species that had been conquered by the Cauldron saw an opportunity. They began rebelling, knowing the Cauldron forces were stretched too thin to stop them. The Cauldron government tried to negotiate. They sent messages to Earth requesting talks about ending the conflict. Earth's response was brief and cold. "Return all surviving colonists. Pay full restitution for damages. Submit to war crimes trials. Dismantle your offensive fleets. Then we'll talk." The Cauldron refused. They couldn't accept such terms. It would mean the end of their empire. So the war continued. Helen had returned to Earth along with the other New Haven survivors. She lived in a small apartment provided by the government, trying to build some kind of normal life. But normal seemed impossible. She couldn't sleep without seeing the explosions, couldn't hear loud noises without flinching, couldn't forget the faces of the people who had died. She watched the war news obsessively, Every Cauldron system captured felt like a small piece of justice. Every Cauldron ship destroyed eased her anger slightly, but it never felt like enough. Nothing could bring back the people she had lost. Kyle visited her often. They were part of a survivors group, 243 people bound together by shared trauma. Some wanted revenge, some wanted peace, some just wanted to forget. Helen wasn't sure what she wanted anymore. "The council is saying we're going too far," Kyle told her during one visit. "Other species are getting nervous about human military power. They want us to negotiate, to compromise." "We tried peace," Helen said bitterly. "We tried being civilized. Look where it got us, I know. But if we destroy the entire Cauldron Empire, what does that make us?" Helen didn't have an answer. She was tired of questions that had no good answers. By month 12, the Cauldron Empire was crumbling. They had lost over 100 star systems. Their economy was in collapse. Their military was down to a fraction of its original strength. Colony worlds were declaring independence. Allied species were breaking treaties. The mighty empire that had expanded for centuries was falling apart. Admiral Morrison's fleet had penetrated deep into Cauldron territory. They now threatened the capital system itself. Morrison stood on his bridge looking at the star charts. One more jump and they would be at the Cauldron homeworld. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the Cauldron government," Beth reported. "They're requesting an immediate ceasefire." "Tell them to broadcast their surrender on all channels," Morrison said. "Full unconditional surrender. War crimes trials, reparations, disarmament, everything. Or we continue to their capital." The Cauldron government deliberated for 3 days. Their fleets were broken. Their empire was dissolving. They had no good options left. Finally, they broadcast their acceptance of human terms. The war was over. It had lasted 18 months. The Cauldron Empire that had seemed so powerful, so threatening, was now a shadow of itself. Humans had won completely and totally, but the victory felt hollow to Helen. Yes, the Cauldron had been punished. Yes, justice had been served. But 8,000 people were still dead. Children who would never grow up. Families destroyed. Lives ended. She attended a memorial service on Earth where the names of every New Haven victim were read aloud. It took 3 hours. 3 hours of names, one after another. Each one a person who had just wanted to live peacefully. Each one gone forever because the Cauldron had decided to attack. Ambassador Cole spoke at the service. "We didn't want this war. We tried for decades to be peaceful members of the galactic community. But when they attacked our civilians, when they murdered our families, we had no choice but to respond. Not for revenge, but for justice. Not for conquest, but for protection, so that no other species would think they could attack humans without consequence." Helen listened to the words. They made sense. They were probably right. But they didn't make her feel any better. Nothing would make her feel better. New Haven was gone. The people she had known were dead. And yes, the Cauldron had paid for it, but that payment couldn't change what had happened. The galaxy watched the end of the war with mixed feelings. The Cauldron had clearly been in the wrong. They had attacked civilians without provocation. They deserved punishment, but the speed and totality of human victory had shocked everyone. Humanity had gone from peaceful traders to terrifying warriors in the space of months. Other species looked at humans differently now. With respect, yes, but also with fear. They understood what most hadn't really believed before. Human peace was a choice, not a weakness. And if you broke that peace badly enough, you faced something no one wanted to face. You faced humanity at war. Part 6. 5 years after the war ended, Helen returned to Virtus 4. The moon looked different now. Where New Haven had burned, a new colony stood. Bigger buildings, wider streets, better defenses. The human government had poured resources into rebuilding, making it a symbol of resilience. Helen walked through the new town center, seeing familiar faces. Some survivors had returned to rebuild. Others, like Kyle, had chosen to stay on Earth or move to different colonies. Everyone dealt with their trauma differently. The memorial stood in the central plaza, a black stone wall 30 meters long, with 8,014 names carved in white letters. Each name represented a life lost. A story ended. A future destroyed. Helen ran her fingers over the names, finding people she had known. Her neighbors, her friends, the teacher who had taught the children, the doctor who had delivered babies. The farmer who had grown the best tomatoes in the colony. All gone. It's beautiful, a voice said behind her. Helen turned to see a young woman with a small child. The memorial, I mean. My daughter asks about the names sometimes. I tell her they were brave people who died protecting this place. Helen smiled sadly. They didn't die protecting anything. They died because someone decided to attack them for no good reason. The woman looked uncomfortable. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. It's okay. You're new here? Yes, we arrived 6 months ago. My husband works at the defense station. We heard this was a good place to raise children. Helen looked around at the new colony. It was good. Better than the original in many ways. There was a proper defense grid now. Military ships patrolled the system. Warning sensors covered every approach. New Haven would never be vulnerable again. But it wasn't the same. The old colony had been peaceful, trusting, open. This new version was harder, more cautious. The people who lived here now knew what could happen. They understood that peace was fragile and safety was never guaranteed. It is a good place, Helen finally said. Just remember the names on that wall. Remember what happened here. Don't let people forget. She left the plaza and walked to the outskirts of the colony. There was a hill there where she used to sit in the early days, watching the forest and feeling grateful for the peaceful life they had built. She sat in the same spot now, looking at how different everything was. Kyle had sent her a message last week. He was working as a counselor now, helping other trauma survivors. He said it gave him purpose, helping people deal with what had happened to them. He asked if Helen had found her purpose yet. She hadn't. She had tried different things. Working in administration, teaching, volunteering, nothing felt right. Nothing filled the empty space inside her. On Earth, the consequences of the war continued to unfold. The Galactic Council had passed new laws about civilian protections. Species that had watched the war now treated humans with careful respect. Trade agreements were negotiated more fairly. Disputes were resolved more quickly. No one wanted to give humanity a reason to mobilize their fleets again. Commander Thraxil remained in prison, serving a life sentence. He had been found guilty of crimes against sapient beings, murder, and violation of interstellar law. The trial had been fair, with proper legal representation and due process, but the verdict had never been in doubt. The evidence was overwhelming. The Caldron Empire had been forced to pay massive restitution to the survivors. They had dismantled their offensive fleets. Their territory had shrunk as former colonies declared independence. The species that had once been a major power was now just another minor player in galactic politics. Some people said humanity had gone too far. That destroying an entire empire over one colony was excessive, but those voices were quiet. Most species understood the message. You could disagree with humans. You could compete with them. You could negotiate hard bargains and drive tough deals, but you never ever harmed human civilians, because that brought consequences no one wanted to face. Admiral Morrison had retired from active service. He gave occasional lectures at military academies, teaching the next generation of officers about the war. He always emphasized the same points. Humans preferred peace. War was expensive and destructive, but when war became necessary, you fought to win completely. You didn't fight half-heartedly. You didn't apologize for victory. You did what needed to be done, and you made sure it never needed doing again. Ambassador Cole continued his work with the Galactic Council. He had been right about the war changing things. Humanity's reputation had shifted from peaceful traders to a species no one wanted to anger. Cole worked to maintain that reputation while also trying to rebuild diplomatic relationships that had been strained by the conflict. We're not warmongers, he explained in countless meetings. We don't want to conquer anyone. We don't seek territory or dominance, but we will protect our people, always. Understanding that is key to understanding humanity. Most species did understand, some didn't and kept their distance from human space. That was fine. Humans had never needed to be friends with everyone. They just needed to be safe. Helen stayed on Virtus 4 for a month, helping with the memorial services on the 5th anniversary of the attack. Families of the dead came from across human space. They gathered at the Black Wall, touched the names, and remembered. The colony administrator, a competent man named Greg Foster, asked Helen if she wanted to stay permanently. They could use someone with her experience and knowledge of the original colony. I don't know, Helen said honestly. Part of me wants to stay. Part of me wants to leave and never come back. That's understandable. This place holds a lot of pain for you. It holds a lot of everything. Good memories and bad. Friends I loved and friends I lost. The life I had and the life that was taken away. Greg nodded. Well, the offer stands. If you decide you want to be here, we have a place for you. Helen thought about it for days. She walked the new streets and saw the old places in her memory. The school building that had stood where apartments were now. The medical center that had been replaced by a larger facility. The homes where families had lived, now rebuilt with different designs. On her last day before her scheduled transport back to Earth, Helen went to the memorial one final time. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the plaza. The names on the wall glowed golden in the light. She found her friend's name, Sarah Porter, who had been a teacher. They had shared coffee every morning and talked about nothing important. Sarah had died in the first bombardment, killed instantly when the school was hit. At least it had been quick. At least she hadn't suffered. I'm sorry, Helen whispered to the name. I'm sorry I survived and you didn't. I'm sorry we couldn't save everyone. I'm sorry this happened at all. The name didn't answer. Names carved in stone never did. But somehow Helen felt a little lighter, a little less burdened. She had said goodbye properly this time. She turned away from the memorial and made her decision. She would stay. Not forever, maybe, but for now. This place needed people who remembered the old colony. Who could tell the new arrivals what it had been like before? Who could make sure the names on that wall weren't just names but people with stories and lives and dreams? Helen contacted Greg Foster. I'll stay. Give me a position in colony administration. I want to help build this place into something those people would have been proud of. Over the next few years, New Haven grew and prospered. It became known as one of the best colonies in human space. Good schools, good medical care, good opportunities. But also safe, well-defended, and prepared for any threat. The memorial remained the heart of the colony. Every child who grew up there learned about the attack. They learned the names. They understood what had happened and why it mattered. They learned that peace was precious but couldn't be taken for granted, that safety required vigilance, that sometimes good people died for no reason except someone else's cruelty. The Cauldron Empire slowly rebuilt itself under strict supervision. They focused on peaceful development, on repairing their economy, on proving they could be trusted again. It would take generations. Maybe it would never fully succeed. But they tried because the alternative was extinction. Other species in the galaxy watched humans carefully. They saw the New Haven Memorial and understood its meaning. They saw human fleets patrolling trade routes and protecting colonies. They saw humans willing to negotiate but also willing to fight when necessary. Most importantly, they learned the lesson that the Cauldron had paid so dearly to teach. Attacking a human colony was the deadliest mistake you could make in the galaxy. Helen stood on her porch one evening, 10 years after the attack. The colony was quiet and peaceful. Children played in the streets. Families ate dinner together. People lived their lives without fear. She thought about the question Kyle had asked years ago. Is this what we are? Is this what we become when someone hurts us? Maybe the answer was yes. Humans were capable of terrible things when pushed to it. They could wage war with ruthless efficiency. They could destroy empires and remake the galaxy through force. But they were also capable of rebuilding, of forgiving eventually, of choosing peace again after demonstrating they were perfectly capable of war, of remembering the dead while protecting the living. That was what made humans dangerous and valuable at the same time. They could do both. They could be gentle traders and fierce warriors,